Hi, my name's William Schaeffer, and today is a recollection of the first PLATO Music Concert. Now, I believe this was in 1982, and it was a couple years after Bigfoot was awarded a prize in the Roland 4th Annual Synthesizer Tape Competition. I was in graduate school, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a concert? What a challenging and difficult idea. But I'd been involved with the PLATO Music Project for several years, and I thought with the resources of the university, we could pull it off. And I had a research assistantship so I could spend the time as part of my job, because a lot of my job was inventing appropriate projects for me to help out with. And the first summer I worked as an undergraduate, I soundproofed the C.E.R.L Sound Lab using basically free materials, and that was a fun adventure. But for the concert, there were a number of difficult challenges. First off, PLATO at the Computer-Based Education Research Lab was not a part of the computer science department or the music department. And it existed as its own entity within the University of Illinois. And the challenge was that neither the computer science department or the music department wanted to own responsibility for PLATO, but they were perfectly happy to exploit the resources if they could. When I was in computer science school, none of the work I did on PLATO was really taken seriously. And in the music school, none of the music was really taken seriously. Now, I have to say, I took music courses when I could. And I was very fortunate to study under Scott Wyatt, who was one of the music professors and who ran the experimental music lab in the music department. And I have nothing but admiration for Scott Wyatt and the project he did. Not only in the beginning music theory courses did I have him as an instructor, but I was also fortunate enough as a graduate student to take one semester of his experimental composition class. I can't remember what it was called, but what an adventure that was. And it was a lot of work, and I learned a lot about music. So this whole discussion, I don't want to sound critical of the music department. Political and social hierarchies exist and structures are set up, and that's just the way they are. And I feel very lucky that I was able to take music courses in the music department and go over and practice on their pianos when I had free time to play piano. Nevertheless, when it came to the idea of having a concert, it seemed to me that if I went directly to the music faculty hierarchy, the idea would get lost in meetings of approval and it would never happen. So instead, now I thought the best place to hold the concert would be in the music building. The Krannert Performance Hall had good auditoriums, but there was a beautiful auditorium in the music school that held about 250 people. And what more appropriate location to hold a concert than in the music school building? So that was my idea right off the bat, that we should hold the concert for PLATO Music in the music building. And the two things I did is I decided we should hold it in the summer when things were not as busy. And I went right to like the head of operations, the physical plant, the lead janitor, the guy who actually took care of that building. He had an office in the basement. And most of the buildings or departments had one guy that was in charge of the physical plant, of making sure that the building was clean and operating and all those sort of things. Now, I explained to him that I would like to reserve the auditorium for a night for a concert. And we were lucky because his children were familiar with Plato, worked on Plato, and he really liked the Plato system. So he told me all I needed to do was find one faculty sponsor, and then we could put on the concert. Now, Professor G. David Peters had a lot of instructional courses on Plato, so I thought he might be favorably inclined to sponsoring a Plato concert, and I was right, and he gave us his approval. So I got a date in July, and that was 2 or 3 months away, and I had 2 or 3 months to plan the event once I got the setting for it. It was going to be a free concert because we did not want to discourage anyone from attending. Our goal was to fill the hall with 250 people, and that seemed like a daunting task to me at the time. First thing we needed was advertising, and because we were a university department, I could get printing for posters done through PLATO, through C.E.R.L. And my girlfriend at the time, Lorraine, designed the poster, and we had met in a graphic arts course, so I felt lucky that there was something that she could do to be a part of this whole procedure. And I liked the design of the poster. And then I got it printed, and I don't know whether we printed 200 or 500 copies. And when I picked them up, we started pasting them all over campus on the bulletin boards in all the classrooms and public spaces. And I would go out on excursions to put up the posters until they were almost all gone. That was our primary form of advertising. I think we might have made a notice on the local radio station, which I think was WEFT. There was a public radio station that was really a pioneer and a champion of public radio. But that was about it. And then the daunting task was to actually organize the concert itself. Now, for the first one, I decided that I would only use my own music. That would be simplest to organize, and if everything failed, I could take all the blame. If we had a group concert and some technical flaw or something bombed, the whole group would look bad. But if it was just my concert and something bombed and went terrible, only I would look bad. So for the first one, I thought it was best that I just use my music. Plus, it was easier to control everything. And at that time, I really had the bulk of the music written that was not just transcriptions of classical pieces. So I talked with Lippold, who at that time was running the project, and he thought it was technically feasible, and we'll talk about that whole thing later. Actually, we'll talk about it right now. Now, at that time was quite a different time. The Plato system ran off of one mainframe computer that was housed at C.E.R.L. And all the remote sites were dial-ups over the phone lines. Now, the phone lines at that time were all analog phone connections. There was no digital phone or digital packeting or anything like that. And when you made a phone call in the late 1970s or the early 1980s, there was actually one physical cable that connected you all the way to the other person, and it was clicked into place by the switcher. So if you called across country, there was one wire that connected you all the way across country to that other person, and then your analog phone conversation would go on that wire. So for this Plato concert, if we were to put a Plato terminal to run the GCS synthesizer in the auditorium, we would need to connect it to the main computer. Now, my memory is sketchy on this, but I think what we finally did was there was a direct physical line all the way to the PLATO Music Lab in the music department where they did PLATO educational lessons. And then Lippold and the engineers ran a physical cable down through the wall, or the stairwell, I forget, all the way to the auditorium, and we were able to put a PLATO terminal on the auditorium. And the day of the concert, or the day before the concert, that was a big engineering challenge to make sure we had a good connection. And that took a little while, and he had a team of fellows helping him. I'm not sure who, but I think Chris DeBruner and Miles Jackson helped out, and I think Tom Cortese helped out also. This was kind of a tenuous connection, because even though there was a direct link between the mainframe and the stage, it still depended on the PLATO terminal working and not freezing. It depended on the mainframe of the software itself not crashing. In those days, the PLATO computer system itself would frequently crash for a number of reasons. And PLATO would go down, and then you'd have to wait for it to come back up again. Now, if that happened in the middle of a concert, when 250 people are sitting there and all of a sudden PLATO crashes and the music stops, that would be a problem. And we did not have the type of memory that you have today. All the memory was on PLATO, because memory was very, very expensive in the early 1980s. That was before compact discs and just about anything digital storage medium existed. That may have been before 3.5 inch or 3.25 inch floppy disks, and you only had the big, floppy disks. I can't even remember, or the hard disks that were very expensive. So anyway, because of that, I made a cassette recording of the concert on my cassette, that if something happened to PLATO, then at least I could play the rest of the music for the people that were there and say, oh, well, sorry, that's the way it goes. Fortunately, that didn't happen. It was totally transparent. PLATO worked perfectly, and I don't think most of the people in the audience realized that there was even a risk of the entire system shutting down. So we were very lucky that way. So then that was it. We put out the posters. I had organized the music. We had to print a program. And with that same university printing facility, we designed and printed the program. So we would have programs to give to people, like a real concert. And the day of the concert, it went well. And I have some Super 8 footage of the audience, and the auditorium was packed. There were 200 to 220 people there. Most of the seats were filled. And the music was well received. But for most of the concert, I didn't know what to do, because all I would do was press a button on the computer and the music would start. So it didn't seem appropriate that I would sit up on the stage next to the computer pressing it and then sitting in my chair like that. So I sat in the front row, which was flush with the stage. There wasn't a raised stage. And I sat in the center of the front row, and every time the previous song ended, I got up and pressed the button to start the next song. And that seemed to work out well. And one last thing that was really nice, that was inadvertent, was there was a video camera and monitors for lectures on the stage. And as part of the setup, as kind of a goof, we had taken an old vector scope that is used for monitoring electronic circuits, oscilloscope. We'd taken an old oscilloscope that was no longer calibrated and able to be used for engineering purposes, and we hooked it up to the synthesizer, so you could see the output waveform from the synthesizer, the analog waveform that was going into the amplifier. And that was always kind of fun in those days to have that little thing right there. So we took that along with us with the PLATO setup, and used the educational video camera and shot that little oscilloscope, and then had 2 television monitors on the side of the stage. For the whole concert, you could watch the waveform, the analog waveform of the music that you were listening to. And that was also very unexpected, but very neat. And it gave some dynamism and movement to the performance. Otherwise, it would have been just looking at a machine sitting on a desk. So everything went really smoothly, and I was very, very lucky. The music was well received. The PLATO system performed well. The setup looked good, and there was a lot of people that attended, and they all felt like it was a worthwhile event. And we got a hearty round of applause at the end. And you know, the one thing that was really neat about this concert was, like engineering week and things like that, is the whole music crew could participate. And we really needed all the engineers to help us out to get the system up and get it running in an unusual environment with a little bit of an engineering challenge. And it was inspiring for the other musicians, and the next year I was lucky enough we were able to hold a concert when everyone was involved. And then the next year another one, and then after I left school they held one more concert, a group concert of everyone involved. And I feel lucky that I was able to start that tradition and help to generate the idea of the PLATO music system as being a legitimate musical instrument with a legitimate musical repertoire. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. I didn't make any money because it was free, and except for the 220 people that were there, it's an event that's largely forgotten about by history. But for me, it was a big step forward and a real challenge, and very heartwarming to see that it was successful and the people enjoyed themselves. Thank you, and leave your comments below.